cubits, that it rose above the ground and further for 150 days. What this is stating is that on day 1, the 15 cubits came along, and on day 150, the 15 cubits started to drain off of the ark. 15 cubits is only 22 feet. 7.5 meters. This is the ark drifting to Mount Ararat, and when it hits the peak, the waters are abating down the mountain until Little Ararat appears. Thus, no mountains were seen for 74 days. And after 74 days of being grounded, the ark being grounded for 74 days, now Little Ararat emerged from the ocean. The record says that when the ark grounded, Noah and the inhabitants of the ark could only see a global ocean. There were no mountains seen for 74 days. Mount Ararat was underwater, so at the time of grounding, Mount Ararat could not be seen. It's after it grounded that the water came down 15 cubits. It exposed Mount Ararat under the ark where it still could not be seen, and it continued to lessen 74 days until Little Ararat emerged out of the ocean. Let us discuss the rainfall of these 40 days. The fastest rainfall on record is 1 inch 23 hundredths, about 1 1/3 inch in a single minute. If this could keep going 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, this would be 73 to 74 inches every hour. Let's say that we had 1 mile of water as an ocean on the planet Earth, and we had 1 mile of water overhead. Well, that 1 mile of water for 40 days, 24 hours, would have to rain down over 5 feet per hour. If we were to add 2 miles of water above the current sea level, take the current sea level, and add 2 miles of water above it, it would not cover Mount Ararat because the base of Mount Ararat is already 1 mile high. But let's bring the continents down lower so that 2 miles of water can cover Mount Ararat. And if we were to add 2 miles of water to the ocean that already exists from sea level upward, it would take 11 feet or 12 feet per hour to accumulate to 2 miles in just 40 days. If we divide that in 2 and say that there's a mile ocean and that you're adding another mile of water, then that would require that the mountain does drop, or the continent drop 1 mile down into the ocean, or a half mile down and the ocean floor come up a half mile up, so that you have 1 mile of tectonics and the other mile would be a water canopy coming down. This water canopy would take almost 6 feet of rain per hour for those 40 days. And here we see potentially it can fall in 1 minute. But we have no other record of 5 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes in which it can fall at this rate. We could assume that it just has a matter of supply of water, that if the supply of water is there, then it could continue to fall at that rate, because 6 feet per hour is 72 inches. And here we have in 1 minute, 1 1/3 inches of rain falling, which would be 74 inches per hour. However, we're back to the problem of living under 1 mile of water canopy. It's the same as living under 1 mile of ocean. Nothing can survive such pressure. Even whales don't live a mile down very long. They come up. However, if you divide a 40-foot canopy or 60-foot canopy by the number of 40 days, you'll get a ½ inch of rain per hour, or slightly more. And we can see that we have had such rains for 4 days and 8 days, where the accumulation of 62 inches in 4 days or 82 inches in 8 days is the same as a ½ inch of rain per hour for a steady 8 days. So it does exist in nature. Therefore, we have the following chart here to show that the accumulation of water to the peak of Mount Ararat was the whole 150 days. It is presumed by Noah, it is presumed by Moses, that if the rain stopped, that the waters had accumulated in just 40 days. However, this isn't physically the case. It can't physically happen or occur this way according to the known laws of Jehovah our God. It's not the first time that biblical writers have been mistaken, and other biblical writers have corrected them. The physical nature of rain and the physical nature of tectonics is quite similar in the way that they both have an immediate rapid reaction, a beginning cause, and then they slowly drain or slowly balance out. For example, you can have an immediate downpour of water that accumulates very rapidly. In this case, they're assuming it's the 40 days of rain. And then the water will accumulate so fast that it takes time to drain away, the 150 days or the whole year. In this way, the tectonics is the same. With tectonics, the pressure is going to build up and the land is going to release with an earthquake, a volcanic reaction. An asteroid is an instant fracturing of the crust causing these things, and then it's going to slowly balance out. So in both scenarios, it's rapid and then slow. But in the case of the rain, we're assuming it's 40 days and thus a long drainage process. While in tectonics, the tectonics is slower than rain. Tectonics is not going to move as much in 40 days that rain would, and it's not going to balance out the rest of the year as fast-flowing water would. The flowing of lava and magma is much slower than that of water. And therefore the effect of building up is going to be slower than water, and the effect of draining away is going to be slower than water. And this is why the tectonics is 150 days, not 40 days. We have to remember that this is not one instant explosion like one volcano, but this is the whole planet, every continent, every plate, every fracture, every crack, every mountain. This is not going to be an instant explosion around the whole planet, destroying the whole surface so that nothing exists. By rapidly building up the water in just 40 days, we now face the dilemma that if the 110 days is drainage, then it is much slower a drainage than if it were to accumulate the water, the 2-mile ocean, overwhelming Mount Ararat, in 150 days and have a drainage of 74. So the 74 days of drainage after grounding on Mount Ararat is much faster than saying it's 184 days, 110 plus 74, after the rain stops. As we have already determined, the 15 cubits is therefore not when the rain stops, that it's 15 cubits over Mount Ararat, but rather when the ark grounds, it is 15 cubits over Mount Ararat. As in every subject, there is an extreme in both directions, not enough and too much. Imaginations go too scientific or imaginations go too fictional. So here's our options. Does Mount Ararat exist as 5,100 meters before the flood so that 5,100 meters plunge down into the ocean? The tectonics isn't going to push the base of the mountain, the top of the continent, down under below the floor of the ocean. The floor of the ocean will become level with the top of the continents, and therefore it can't plunge 5,100 meters down. However, Mount Ararat is not necessarily 5,100 meters high before the flood. So now, does it plunge 2,700 meters down so that it balances with the ocean? Well, if it does, is this in 40 days or in 150 days? The question is important because the ark doesn't ground on Ararat until 110 days after the 40 days. During this 110 days, if the water is from the 40-day canopy, is the water now draining in the 110 days? That could put the ocean level on day 40 as high as 7,100 meters up in the air. Though that doesn't cover Mount Everest, it does imply that 2,000 meters of water dropped down before it exposed Mount Ararat in 110 days. Is there that much water? No, there isn't, because again, that would then mean that the tectonic plunge would have to be 7,100 meters to expose Ararat 110 days later. Even if you were to say that during this 110 days that the plunge was just 6,300 meters so that it grounded the ark at 4,300 meters, the problem is still remains meaning that you're plunging the continent 6,000 meters when there is only 2,700 meters of ocean. Therefore, it is imperative that the whole 150 days is rising ocean levels, because the continents are dropping in the whole 150 days. If Mount Ararat was not seen before grounding, it is because the ark was not close enough. It's not because, Angelo Pelago says, Noah had a window but it was facing the wrong direction. It wasn't because Noah had a window but it was closed, he didn't open it yet, because the Bible is with intent to give scientific information. It always has been. If you read the Law of Moses, it's an intent to be scientific. Even for this reason, we come back to Angelo Pelago, the Italian, who went up Mount Ararat and claims that he has found the ark, although it's embedded under snow, so he hasn't actually uncovered the wood or been inside it, but he feels that he has calculated it with this formula of drainage from the peak of Ararat down to the peak of Little Ararat, because there are only two mountains. And when it says in 74 days that other mountains were seen, this can't be the mountains to the south because they're too far away. And they can't be the mountains to the north because they're too far away. So the mountains to the north must be the mountains that the dove flew to and brought back an olive leaf. Learning the nature of Jehovah unveils everything. And in this case, to know the nature of Jehovah means to know the nature of the dove. The dove is a bird that returns within the day. It doesn't fly away for 3 days and come back a week later. If you release it today, it will come back today because it'll come back at sunset. So if you release it in the morning, it will fly as far as it can or to where it can see within a day, sit there, enjoy the day, and come back at sunset. This is what Noah did once a week. So it wasn't a week-long journey or 1 week that the bird was gone. The nature of the bird is to fly upward and circle around, and as it circles around, it's looking for land. And obviously here it headed north because that's where the land was. This bird was tired. He flew 56 miles one way and then 56 miles back. So it was not something you would do the next day. You would give that bird a rest. And meanwhile, the ocean drains 7 days more. And then he sends the bird off again, so that the drop in elevation of the water, or the rise of the tectonic plates, exposes the olive trees. Perhaps the olive trees were already exposed 7 days earlier, but they're now sprouting. So the elevation, or the rate of draining away of the water, or rising of the tectonic plates, can be calculated with this trip of the dove just as easily as it was calculated in the rise of Little Ararat. In fact, we have two aspects to now compare. The rate from the peak of Mount Ararat to the peak of Little Ararat, and from Little Ararat until the dove comes back with an olive leaf. Because olives only grow at a certain elevation, under a certain air pressure. So it is determined by the air pressure before the flood, the air pressure after the flood, and at what height has the tectonic plates lifted up to. However, in calculating these 74 days, just because he found the ark, it's like Columbus finding America. It doesn't mean his calculations are correct. Columbus thought he was in China because he was using an Italian mile, and he thought that the earth was smaller than it really is. So too then, Pelago concludes that the 15 cubits over Mount Ararat was on day 40. And that the ark grounded 110 days later when the mountain of Ararat was an island. And then the water continued to drain 74 days until the peak of Little Ararat protruded the water 100 meters above the surface. So then he assumes that the ark merely floated up to the island of Mount Ararat and grounded on the shore, and that's why he thinks that that's where the original location was. Instead, the ark had grounded on the very peak. It had grounded on day 150, and it had slid down during the 74 days. It had grounded on day 150. Yes, 110 days after the rain stopped, but it was not 110 days after the 15 cubits. The 15 cubits is when it grounded. When it grounded, the 15 cubits that the ark set in then drained off the ark, and therefore the 15 cubits over Mount Ararat was draining first off the ark and then off of Mount Ararat. The ark coming from the north, as in this illustration, this video analogy, it contradicts the fact that the ark came from the south, that it came from Shuruppak. It also contradicts the fact that there was a pre-flood city Larsa and a post-flood city Larsa. Both of them are to the south. Therefore, the ark was built in the south, and it flowed north. It didn't flow south. This alone means that the ark, to ground on the north side as it did, would have to flow either over Mount Ararat or around Mount Ararat to get to the other side. So the 15 cubits drains off the ark first. The ark is on the very top of Mount Ararat. So the 15 cubits of water drains off the ark first, and then it drains off the mountain, taking the ark with it, sliding down the mountain. Not the other way around. Not 15 cubits over Ararat drains off the mountain first, and then the ark grounds, and so it drains off the ark. There's no two figures of 15 cubits. It's not 15 cubits over Mount Ararat, and then draining 110 days off of Mount Ararat, the ark grounds, and it drains 15 cubits off the ark. It doesn't do both. The thing is, though, that the excuse is, Pelego will say that Genesis says that there is only one window. So for 110 days, the ark is floating towards Mount Ararat from the north, but it doesn't see Mount Ararat out the window because the window's to the north and Mount Ararat's to the south. But the question is, if Noah could see little Ararat to the south after the ark grounded, then why couldn't Noah see big Ararat to the south before the ark grounded? Did the ark turn around on the last day when it grounded? In which case, when it turned around, it would have been able to see big Ararat. So in either case, it sees big Ararat after it grounds. The simple fact is that with the draining rate from the peak of Mount Ararat as 15 cubits, 7 meters, 22 feet, down to the top of Little Ararat, with that draining rate, it cannot possibly be a truth because the water will not reach the bottom valley of Mount Ararat. You'll end up with this Lake Pelago, Angelo Pelago's lake. Therefore, it is clearly imperative that the ark grounded with 15 cubits over Mount Ararat. That is the height of the ark at the point of grounding, because only then does the water drain at a fast enough rate that it is out of the valley, the Ararat Valley, when Noah and his family are forced by the weather and the altitude of the thin air to evacuate and descend down to live in that valley. They lived in the valley in tents. They had to leave the ark as a sturdy, strong home because now it was too cold, air was too thin, the ark was covered with snow. If the global flood occurred because of a falling water canopy, then it could never occur again because the rainbow proves there is no water up there anymore. However, Attorney Joseph Rutherford had presented the concept that other floods had occurred before, that shields or spheres of elements had collapsed. He was not a man to say that this was unscriptural or that these things were not possible within creation. Therefore, this would make a flood capable of happening again. Just as it happened many times before Adam, it is very possible to occur again because it's just a baptism of the continents. In which case, that is why this information is very important and very pertinent to the nature of Armageddon. The disasters in the Bible have always been selective in the way, like any disaster, it requires behavior to react, to save yourself from it, and then to take the blame if you die because you did contrary to what it required to save you. This is not always saving yourself by the means that someone else says you have to do it. Some people say, oh, you gotta save yourself, drink our poison, and get raptured to heaven. Other people say, oh, you got to save yourself, you've got to buy a boat. Others say you have to build a bomb shelter underneath the ground. Of course, if there's going to be flooding again, a bomb shelter is going to drown you. It's going to guarantee your death, not save you. So the question is, what do you do to save yourself? It is said that some people were told to save themselves by not going into the World Trade Center the day that it collapsed. They were not told why they should not go to work today, but they were told, and so they didn't go. Thus, your future is pertinent to what you do. It's selective. In this way, God is selective. But the people who are leading you, or the person who is leading you and claims that his authority is from higher up, whether it be higher up, they represent God, or whether it be higher up, they represent an important authority of the church. If they're wrong, Jehovah's law will still put you to death. You will take the risk. And that's why the information is pertinent. And this is pertinent even in Sodom and Gomorrah, because Lot and his wife didn't want to leave the house. Oh, do we have to climb hills? Do we have to climb mountains? Can't we go to Zoar? Is Zoar going to be destroyed? They made an issue over where will the boundary be? Where can we be safe? Can we go here? Can we go there? Can we go to the Appalachian Mountains in America, which are only 6,000 feet high? Yes, it's very close to taking a risk of death when you start playing this game of where can we go that's easier and where can we go that will be just as safe, just across the line, just over the wall. The earthquakes that Jehovah has been producing, which will always exist, just as we will always have rivers that take mud away, dirt away. We'll always have water that flows downhill, not set still. We'll always have water that if it sets still, it'll become stagnant. Although man can control how many swamps we have, or how many rivers we have, or collect the waters, or divide the waters, though man has a hand in these physical laws, he's working with them, not against them. He's working with what he knows about Jehovah. And so, the question then comes, are we learning from Jehovah? The earthquakes or tectonics of moving the land, of building, construction. As this video started out, Jehovah is a God of construction. He is like man. He destroys a tree to build a house. This will always be a process. It's why the Hindus see God as both the destruction and the creation, and therefore as if Satan and God are one, which they're not, because Satan is the rebelling against God. But that doesn't mean that God is not the forces that can be, in human opinion, a destruction. And that's true. You could build a house by chopping down a forest of trees, and someone else can be calling you a destroyer. You're destroying the forest because you want a house. It is always the case where something is sacrificed. Jesus said that something had to be sacrificed to build the kingdom. He said this on the day of his death. You had to sacrifice or kill the seed. He didn't mean kill it by drown it, have it rot, or chop the seed up. He meant you had to be willing to give up. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You had to be willing to give up the seed planted in the ground if you want it to grow in a tree. It may not, it may rot, but you have to take that risk. No risk, no gain. No venture, no gain. Jesus and Jehovah know that. That's the way things have been created. So now, take a look at the earthquakes and the tsunamis. They're showing us that there is a rate of shift in the land by 40 to 45 feet. The ocean floor shifts, rises 40 feet. This is the indication of what happened during the flood. And it's the indication that will also tell us where the places of safety are when the next asteroid, when Armageddon comes. This is also why it becomes pertinent as to the fact that the ark did land on Mount Ararat. It didn't land on Little Ararat, or that big mountain would have been seen. It didn't land on other hills, small lower mountains in the land of Ararat, because the minute you start playing games with the words and saying, see, Ararat is a land, not a mountain, and see, there are other hills, other mountains, none of them are even half the height or even near the size of Little Ararat. These are two specific mountains known as Ararat, so there is no other place it would be. As you can see, in the whole area, in the whole land, there are no mountains like this. And the minute you start playing games with words saying, oh, but look, Genesis says mountains, you have to go and you have to look at what others have said. When Jesus said the fact that there is a resurrection is proven by Jehovah, he said to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, as if Abraham existed. He didn't say I was the God of Abraham. But this doesn't mean that Jesus wanted to teach that Abraham was in heaven alive. And that's the same with Paul. Paul says, you see this God that you've been sacrificing to? You don't want to leave anybody out, so you have an altar to an unknown God? Well, I've brought to you an unknown God, Jehovah, who sent his son Jesus. He wasn't saying all these many decades you've been sacrificing to Jehovah. He wasn't saying that. Nor was he saying put Jehovah's name on your altar and continue to sacrifice to him. He wasn't saying that either. But he was saying that the man had come along who was the Christ to show you how to sacrifice properly, with the heart, with love. This has always been the case. It has always been a truth. Because even the Maya, they show that they knew you had to sacrifice from the heart. But, as always with language, they thought it means cut hearts out and sacrifice them. Language will always be very figurative. Right here in these two mountains you have the Father and the Son, and the ark of safety to enter the new world when the old world passes away rested upon the Father and the Son. The next chapter on the next DVD disc will cover the structure of Noah's Ark and then go into post-flood history.